Okay. So the roofing business, was that your biggest exit?
It was, yeah. So the roofing business in the Front Range of Colorado, which I sold in 2009, that was my biggest exit. So we bought that business. I think it was about 600,000. I say we, it was me, I guess, no partner, but $600,000 in revenue approximately. And 7 years later, 6.5, 7 years later, sold it at 47 million in annual revenue. Sold it to private equity, a couple guys that had their own fund, and it was time for the opportunity to get out, right?
Have you ever wondered how successful architecture, engineering, and construction companies scale their business?
Or have you ever wanted guidance on how to get more growth, wealth, and freedom from your AEC company?
Well, then you're in luck. Hi, I'm Will Forat.
And I'm Justin Nagel, and we're your podcast hosts.
We interview successful AEC business leaders to learn how they use people, process, and technology to scale their businesses.
So sit back and get ready to learn from the industry's best. This is Building Scale.
Hey listeners, it's Will here. Our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy. If you've ever listened to our show, then you know that the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology. So if you suspect technology is your weak link, then book a call with us to see where we can help maximize your company's IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
Today's guest is Chad Nikkel. Chad is a partner and business guide for Next Level Growth, where he helps entrepreneurial leaders build elite organizations. He's a mastermind in business growth, and he's founded and scaled 11 companies, including 7 acquisitions and 4 successful exits. One of those exits was a roofing company at 47 million, which is super impressive, with a background in engineering from K-State.
Go Wildcats.
Kansas State, go goodness, Wildcats. Chad brings a unique mix of analytical precision and creative leadership. At Next Level Growth, Chad helps leaders gain clarity, build alignment, and drive growth by aligning short-term action with long-term vision. He believes life's too short not to enjoy what you do, and his coaching helps business owners rediscover both freedom and fulfillment in their work. And with all that said, Chad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. That was a heck of a bio there. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Good. Hire you to write those things from now on. That was awesome.
well, I'm glad that it's approved.
Great to be here, guys.
When we first met, and we got introduced from Scott.
Yeah.
Right, Franchini.
Yes.
Who was also on the podcast a year, half ago, Will, something like that.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a while.
It's a few episodes back, definitely. You're gonna have to scroll to find the episode.
You gotta find him in there. Yeah, great guy. Scott's an awesome dude.
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah, so I said a bunch of fun stuff about you, but tell us the background. How did you decide to become a business owner? And then obviously, how did you get into the roofing side of things? And then why now are you a business guide at Next Level Growth?
Yeah, for sure. That's a lot of questions there. You might have to.
I know. I'm just bam.
How did I decide? Let's go with the business owner thing. I think it sort of just found me. Like I don't think I decided. I was a teenager at the time. I was 15 when I started my first business, and always had sort of an entrepreneurial spirit, right? I was born and raised in Kansas on a farm, so sort of wanted something to get off the farm and get away from that. But one of the things that farm life taught me, I think, was that whole you shake somebody's hand, look them in the eye, you do what you say you're going to do no matter what, right? That's the deal. There's no, there's no contract, right? Like that is the contract. So, I go back on that a lot. That's good. But starting the first business there happened to be in the roofing space. So that was my first sort of foray, if you will, into, home services or construction type businesses. And cut my teeth in sort of a hard business to cut my teeth on.
So then what has brought you to become a coach for others?
Yeah. So, obviously it's been a long journey, right? So I'm 50 years old today. So 35 years of entrepreneurship along the way, 11 businesses, you mentioned 11 businesses. It's 11 businesses that made a profit. There was many more that I started that, just didn't work out, right? I learned as life went to fail fast, right? Like, this isn't going to work. It's time to cut, get away from that, right? But 11 businesses that made a profit. Out of those 11 businesses, 7 of those were in the home services or construction space. So I've got a lot of experience in that. And then even out of the 4 that were not, they were somewhat adjacent, right? So I own a marketing company that, was focused on contractors, on the unique things that home service people deal with, right? Like contractors in general, what produces a customer is much different than what produces a customer for a bank or a restaurant or, a software company like you guys, right? But that whole perspective, I think it was an adjacent business, but it's still built on things that I understood really well.
That's awesome. I also love the openness to say, like, I actually started more, but I don't count those because they didn't make a profit. So that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, those don't count. It's like going to another country and not having a meal there. It doesn't count. You can't count it if you don't have a meal in that country. That's the rule.
That's super fair. Does that also count for states? Because I don't know if I've eaten in every state I've been in. So those don't count.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. That's a good question.
Okay, so let's talk about let's start with some of these businesses that you had. So you've done a ton of founding as well as roll-ups that go into that. So let's kind of talk about what that looked like. So you said you started in roofing initially. Where did things go from there?
Yeah. So what I found along the way is that I actually like M&A. I enjoy founding, but I really like finding some company that has opportunity to do better, do more, be more optimized, let's call it, and sort of help them build, build from that. So in the roofing business, I also rolled up some companies underneath there. So I went and bought, some other companies that made sense and rolled them in that space. In the pool business, I did the same thing. So my last business that I sold 3 years ago was a pool service company, a very small company when I bought it, 25, 30 pools a week. And 6 years later, sold it doing 2,000 pools every week in the Scottsdale, Paradise Valley area. So,
wow.
But I bought others along the way and rolled them up underneath that same company.
Okay. So the roofing business, was that your biggest exit?
It was, yeah. So the roofing business in the Front Range of Colorado, which I sold in 2009, that was my biggest exit. So we bought that business. I think it was about 600,000. I say we, it was me, I guess. No partner, but $600,000 in revenue approximately. And 7 years later, 6.5, 7 years later, sold it at 47 million in annual revenue. Sold it to private equity, a couple guys that had their own fund, and it was time for the opportunity to get out, right? So yeah,
that's insane growth. That's bananas growth.
Yeah, it's probably one of those things. I always wrapped it back in, right? You make some money, and instead of being like, all right, sweet, we should go do something else with it, or buy a rental house or whatever. No, I always put it back into the business because my goal was bigger, better, more, right? And really build it. And we did succeed in that in the Front Range. So we were the largest steep slope roofing contractor in the Front Range. So steep slope meaning like shingles, tile, metal, that kind of thing, not commercial buildings. And 6,500 roofs a year approximately. So that works out to, I think, 17 every single day. And Colorado does not have the best weather in the world some parts of the year. So learning how to roof and apply product when it was, 20 degrees and blowing snow and whatnot is still important because you had to sort of produce product or produce jobs. But we worked from Pueblo all the way to Fort Collins. Obviously the heart of that business is in Denver, all of those communities along the way. And then we did a lot of super custom stuff like tile and metal and that kind of thing. So custom homes, we did some of that work in the mountains as well. Very complicated projects, people that would, they'd fire multiple roofers before they found us. And we always liked those kind of projects for sure. Let's figure it out.
2009. I would imagine that's not the easiest time to do, especially when the housing market basically just blow it up. I don't think that's the easiest time to go sell a company. Or is it? Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I will tell you, the one thing about roofing is economically inelastic, right? You can put off your new kitchen. You can, not buy a car. You can, do all those things. But when your roof leaks, you got to do something about it, right? And so it's a economically inelastic business. And it's something I've always loved about that. What comes with that, unfortunately, though, is a negative sale connotation. Nobody ever wakes up one day and says, oh, you know what? I want a red roof. Let's just tear off the gray one and put a red one on. That doesn't happen. It's not a thing. And, like a kitchen, you're like, oh yeah, I'd like some new countertops or whatever. So, we'll go ahead and do that kind of sale. Roofing is always negative. It leaks. You had a hailstorm. Something happened that means you have to deal with the roof, or maybe you're selling the house or, whatever the case might be. And that aspect of it is both good and bad, because the sale, you're overcoming the objection of the fact that I have to spend $30,000 on my roof, and you're convincing somebody to do that. And it's not a sexy, fun thing. It's going to be a mess, all these other things that come with it. But the flip side of that is the roof leaks. It's causing damage. We need to do something about it. And so you have, even in bad economy, you have the opportunity to sell roofs. That is my belief about that business. So you're right. Housing was really, really getting its ass kicked. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should have hung on to it longer. Probably a learning lesson. Yeah.
All right. So roofing was your most successful. What were some of your other exits? Just talk about those, the companies and the exits, just so we can get a gauge.
Yeah, for sure. So the marketing business, we really were successful in sort of finding a niche in the marketing world, and did a lot of pay-per-click and radio and some other things like that, right? So we're very successful in that, and ended up selling that to a partner. That was a really good exit for me. I was also in the logistics business, so we did trucking essentially. So that business we sold as well. So those went to sort of smaller kind of strategic buyers. And but the two private equity plays, the roofing business, and then my pool company. So my pool service company, very small company. I think it was about $11 million in revenue when we sold it. That business went to a private equity roll-up company that is the largest pool service company in the nation now. So they, operations in Florida and Arizona and Texas. I think last time I checked, I think they service somewhere around 28 or 30,000 pools a week. So sizable company.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That is scales. Yeah. That is magnitudes.
And scales and magnitude. The thing about pool service versus like roofing, right? Roofing, if it's a $25,000 or $30,000, roof every time, pool service is $120 or, $150, right? So it's a lot of little widgets you have to string together to make a sizable company. So much more complicated. It is reoccurring revenue. That's good, but a much more complicated, aspect when it comes to home services for sure.
Okay. That's
a lot of technicians and trucks and insurance nightmares, right?
Mm. So let's talk for a second, because when we heard the number, you said that you had said something about that if you don't grow essentially fast enough, there's reasons for it, and you should be able to grow it at a good clip, especially, let's say, for the roofing business. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, like why that is, and what did you do to actually get it up there that quick?
Well, some of the things with any kind, I don't think this is just home services or just construction companies, but if you're not growing, if you're not growing, you're dying thing, that statement is a reality, right? Because it's not just inflation that catches you. It's level of risk. It's people. It's all of these other sort of overhead or built-in cost to operate that don't go down, right? So as you sort of, let's just say you're at $10 million and you're sort of stuck there, right? We're struggling to grow past $10 million. Your overhead costs are staying fairly static, but they're going up with inflation. So your costs of, that leadership team, your costs of those employees is actually going up, and, health insurance, everything is rising on a fairly consistent basis. So if we're not selling more and selling it more efficiently, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6%, I think it's double inflation is roughly the figure. So if you're not doing at least 5 to 6% growth, you're going backwards at a fairly significant clip. And so if you get 2 or 3 years down the road and you start to look back and you're like, well, we used to be making 10, 11, 12, 18%, whatever it was, EBITDA. And now all of a sudden we're like 6, 7, 8. We're sort of like stuck in this thing. Why are we suddenly 2 or 3 points lower? Well, the fact is, because you stayed at that number, you actually went backwards at double inflation. So that's the thing. You need to grow at 5 or 6% just to stay static. So if you're a $10 million company, if you don't do 10.5 next year, you're not static. You're going backwards. So that's why I all my clients, the goal is to always have double digit growth, because we need to be, we need to be consistently hitting those growth numbers. So that 10, 20% number should be well within reach if we organize the business to run efficiently and optimize it.
Well, so in order to grow, then the obvious side is that you have to have sales.
Yes.
For those of you that didn't find that obvious, just need to point that out, right?
Sales
So
everything.
then sounds like you might have some experience about growing sales teams.
Yeah, sales. I mean, I love sales, right? So sales is fun. It's the old aspect of, teaching people, hunting, all of those things. Good salespeople that are really good at, good at the kill, as we say, all these like terms we use, war terms, whatever they are when it comes to sales, right? It's got its own vernacular. But I think that aspect of good salespeople doing what they do best, like really selling, not doing too much of the minutia, right? Really good salesperson that's really good at closing, really good at being a salesperson should be selling and not doing too much of the minutia, because there's other ways to get the minutia in there, right? And, so that's a strong belief of mine. It's like building a sales team that has real rainmakers, like the really good killers on that team, and letting them be salespeople as opposed to making them, be order takers and, CRM fillers and all this other stuff, right?
How do you
Okay.
solve that problem? Because I would say most owners, leaders would say, yo, you need to fill out the shit. Like, I don't know. I have no idea what you're doing. Like, you got to fill these things out, or you got to, we got to hit KPIs. And how do I know if I have no data to showcase any of this? So how do you solve that problem? Or is that just like, oh, that's ridiculous. Just go, just shoot from the hip and you'll be fine.
Yeah, no, it's the old chicken and the egg theory, right? So, but in reality, there's lots of simple ways to do this. And in today's world, there's lots of good automations and other things that can help with some of the stuff. But I always told my sales guys, look, the simple thing I just want you to do is go into iPhone notes or iPhone memo and just hit record when you leave the customer's house and just brain dump everything about that job for 10 minutes into that note and just send that to the office. And then the office person now has 90% of the data that they need. They can fill out the job profile. They can put all the stuff in the CRM that the owner is going to want to see, all of that stuff in there. And then they can call you and spend 10 minutes on the phone or text you back and forth or whatever it is to get the other 10%. And now we actually have a job file that we can build. Now we actually have the data correct. Like now production, when they get the stuff, they go, oh, we have the right color for the metal and we have the right amount of, vents or whatever we're doing. That aspect is far easier than a salesperson getting back to the office and spending 2 hours going over a damn folder and probably can't read their writing anyways. And, they are terrible at typing. And so the stat is in the wrong place in the field of the CRM anyways. And so it just complicates the system. I don't know how many salespeople I had where they would put a space after a decimal point and it would just screw up the KPIs, right? You're like, wait, no. I think today's world's a little different. Some of that stuff is a little more automated, but back then it was like, bro, just like, don't put us, never mind. Just go sell some more stuff. We'll figure the rest of that out. Because that aspect, because production, the old argument, production never builds the jobs on time. Sales never turns in a job correctly, right? That's back and forth. If we can eliminate that, massive beneficial. It's better for the salesperson to go, detox and from that sale and go have a coffee or something instead of trying to, get a file put together that, there's other people that can do it better.
Okay. So what makes not a good, but what makes a great salesperson?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the product to some degree, but
Okay.
I think really great salespeople are really good at relationships. First of all, like really good at relationships, like not, I'm not talking about personal relationships, but like making people feel comfortable very quickly. They have that's key. If somebody's just like maybe not so great at conversation or a little bit odd, yeah, you know what I mean? A salesperson has to be somebody you want to talk to, right? Like I gotta want to talk to. That's part of it. That's key. It's like the 3-legged stool. Without that leg, none of the other legs matter. So you have to have that first. The second thing is salespeople should follow a natural flow and process, like a sales process, right? There should be like a natural flow and sales process that is like innate to them. And it might be the process that the company developed, like, hey, we talk about this and then we talk about that and then we talk about that. But they should follow that flow sort of automatically, right? It shouldn't be like they're reading a script or anything. It's like that flow is built in. And then I had a sales trainer years ago, and one of his key points, it stuck with me. I think it's like probably 20 years ago at this point. One of his key things was, other than price or payment, is there any reason we couldn't put you in at whatever today, right? Other than price or payment. And that little thing, it got all the objections off, but that's part of the flow. It's like, what is that objection flow? Getting all those objections gone. And now all we're talking about is the price or the payment. I think just having that flow that gets you to that point is the other piece that makes a really good salesperson, right? And then the last thing is, they should be driven to continually want. When you have a salesperson that gets a big commission check, and they have we had a really good month and they got a nice big commission check, they don't need to work for another 2 or 3 months to pay their bills. It's the worst thing, because the company needs them selling more, you know what I mean? And because there's no consistency. If they sold great and then all of a sudden they fell off the cliff and didn't, went to Fiji for 3 months, the problem is that doesn't work for the business. It's fine for the salesperson, but it doesn't work for the business. So you need salespeople that light consistently and are hungry for the next kill. Salespeople are all money motivated, but they also need to be kill motivated. It's like the next job, the next deal, right? And you need motivated by that as well. So those 3 things, in my opinion, make a great salesperson.
Oh, what you're saying is that they shouldn't be really long-term, overly articulate thinkers. They need to be able to be fast moving and get to the end result. Quicker the better.
Yeah, I mean, let's ask for the sale. I mean, let's make sure the customer understands everything. You know what I mean? I'm not from, I don't say you should be snake oil salesman, right? No, you should understand all the components of what you're buying. But the salesperson should naturally be explaining that. There's this part in the process where people are ready to buy. A really great salesperson sort of recognizes that and sort of maybe pushes for that right before that comes up, right? I used to teach this thing years ago. Back in the day, we had clipboard. There went the dog.
It happens.
It happens. Shit. Sorry, guys. Back in the day, we had clipboards, and we would sort of take the pen and remove the cap so it would sort of roll. And you just hand that to the customer and sort of angle it their way. Well, the pen's rolling toward the customer, they naturally grab it, right? This is a little sales trick, but that thing of salespeople sort of leading people to make that next decision, it's the natural thing.
Okay. So really that experience. So would you say that you need to have highly experienced salespeople to be good? So you have to have failed for 20 years to be a good salesperson?
No.
Is that what you're looking for?
No, absolutely not. In fact, sometimes that 20-year person is the wrong person, but you need that innate ability. I think if you have that sales personality, we can teach everything else. You can teach that flow. You can teach those things, but you have to have that sales personality.
Do you have litmus tests for testing for that personality?
Yeah, I don't know. That's it. It depends a little bit on the business. In home services, it's really like a conversation. It's like, can you have a conversation with me that sort of draws me in, that I'm interested to talk to you? I think that's key. Now, I think good, successful sales teams all have a good sales manager that's, sort of helps pull the data together and, keeps them excited and that kind of thing. Right. So that person is probably doing that hiring. So, they would need to understand how to, kind of pull that conversation together. But if somebody cannot carry on a conversation, if they're not, willing to talk about the Bears, then that's not going to work.
Win or lose. Sorry.
Everybody should be able to talk about the Bears. That's my opinion.
Yeah, with their 6-3 record. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Sorry. Real quick segue there.
There we go. Taking the left turn.
You mentioned sales manager. What's the difference there? What's their personality? Are they different than salesperson, or are they the same?
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm not saying that there's never a good salesperson that makes a good sales manager, but most of the time that is not the case. Good sales managers are really good at managing people and sort of like the herding the cats stuff, right? Because salespeople are not going to be very focused. So a really good sales manager needs to be able to sort of herd the cats. So somebody that's, really good at, probably keeping 11, 12-year-old kids in a going in the right direction is probably.
I really like the metaphor. I could imagine it. So
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. But that's pretty key. The other thing is salespeople really respond well to, the pat on the back, like, hey, good job, Jimmy, man, that was awesome. So a sales manager needs to have that aspect of it too. It's like that raw aspect is important.
Makes
Okay.
sense.
why the short attention span? Just to
Why do
connect the dots.
salespeople have short attention?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. A lot
Okay.
might disagree with me on that, but I think a short attention span is okay in sales because you get a shit ton of no's, right? Sometimes those no's are not the nicest, not said in the nicest way, right? You know what I mean? And so it's important for salespeople to be able to forget that, right? Just like let that one go right on to the next one, and get in the frame of mind that this client, Mrs. Smith is going to buy from me, right? Versus like, oh man, I really got my ass kicked on that last one, and now I'm pull that into this next sale. And desperation, nobody buys from a desperate salesperson, no one, right? Like, so you need to have that short attention span. You need to be able to forget. It's like forget and move forward. That's
I would totally agree with you 110% there. Because if it is the no, because you're going to get no way more than you get yes. So if you can't let that roll off and you can't just forget and on to the next one, you live in the negative. And if you live in the negative, you're not, like, it's harder to sell because you don't bring the energy and you don't do, it's just like this cyclical thing. So, or even like when a great salesperson gets in a funk, it's like, oh yeah, you're in a funk right now, and that's your problem. You need to get your head out of your ass. And then once you do that, you're going to be back to, slanging sales day after day. It's just, negativity can be such a crucial demotivator in sales.
Negativity breeds negativity. Nobody listens to a motivational speaker that's not motivational, right? They only get booked once. Sales the same way, right? It's the same way. You got to bring. You're just not in front of Mrs. Smith again. You're just in front of Mrs. Jones, right? So you got to bring it 100%.
Yeah. So sales, obviously hugely massive when you're building a business or, putting a business together to eventually exit that business. What are some other systems or other, essentially fractions of the business that need to be in place that makes your business, worth something?
Yeah, for sure. Well, when it comes to exit, I think every business should be built to sell, right? It's even if you're going to run this business for the next 30 years, pass it on to your kids, whatever that is, the business, or to give you that sort of return on life or that, space, it needs to be organized in the same way. And what I mean by that is it needs to operate without you. So the owner is quite often, especially in smaller businesses, is the bottleneck, right? So we have to build the business out to operate somewhat independently of the owner. The way to do that is get a really good leadership team in place. And even if you can't afford a full leadership team, if you're at the sort of the spot where you can't afford these people yet, sort of building out the roles of those people and having, one person might act as 2 or 3 of those roles, but they're sort of like really concentrate on those roles at the time. Building that leadership team or that sort of operating system for the business and putting that in place is really, really crucial from the perspective of each role should have what we call obsessions, right? So each role should have 5 or 6 things that all they think about is those things, right? So sales manager, those 5 obsessions, are in place, right? But it's not 28 things, right? It's these 5 things. People get sort of trapped in this thing where they have a job description that has 30 things that this person should be doing. And so we're not doing any of them well, right? So kind of boiling that down to those 5 or 6 things that that seat obsesses about every time. That's critical first, right? Like really get those key things in place and figure out what those key things are for each seat. And then the business sort of starts to operate with more autonomy over the owner. Doesn't mean the owner shouldn't oversee or check on or whatever. But when we get it in place where people are actually making decisions based on their seat, on that criteria and based on the core values of the business, then we can actually expand and scale.
Okay.
So that's first.
So obviously you map it out, whiteboard it out, however you make some strategy planning and saying like, hey, I need these 3 departments, 4 to 5 departments, whatever he shakes out to be for you. And then you say, okay, hey, there's 2 of us or 3 of us and we got to focus on, you sit in these 2 seats, I'll sit in these 3. And then slowly, depending on what the needs of the business are, you fill those seats. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think as if you sort of think about inception of a business and when it sort of reached critical mass, you think about like where are we going to spend our money or our capital from a perspective of human capital first. And, obviously revenue generation is critical, right? Without revenue generation, we can't afford to, pay the light bill, right? So we have to think about revenue generation and how can we drive revenue generation? Now that doesn't mean, so if you look at a home services or construction business, a lot of that sort of production or operations part of the business, that doesn't mean you should ignore that. You need to find ways early on, you need to find ways for that department to also drive revenue. And so what I mean by that is, hey, if let's just say we sold a pool services client, well, the production department needs to continually find ways to make that client turn into more, right? So not just $150 a month, period, go, go, go. It's $150 a month plus, well, hey, look, do you need your tile cleaned or do you need your filter cleaned or, who do you know? Like, hey, by the way, can we talk to your neighbor? That kind of thing. The production department needs to be thinking about that from a revenue side of things as we roll forward. Because if we're not thinking that way, until we become a bigger business where we have people like sort of siloed and thinking about revenue generation and, operations separately, we never be able to afford that part of the business. So revenue generation, critical. Got to figure that out. Everybody needs to be focused on that in the early parts of the business.
Do you think that's the biggest hurdle, especially early founder startups or, early to the business, that they find, hey, I'm a really, really great drywaller. Like I'm extraordinarily good at this, but I've not had to like go hunt myself. So now it comes like I opened my own business because I thought I can do it better than whoever was paying me before. And now I'm in this scenario where I got to feed the business. Is that the biggest hurdle you see with your clients?
Well, yeah, what happens a lot of times, people, especially in that smaller scale, they just have built themselves a job, right? It's not a real business. You just created yourself a job that you sort of manage and control. And in some cases will be more work, considerably more work than what you had when you're working for someone else, right? So sort of getting away from that aspect of the technician doing everything, especially the part where the technician's answering the phone. It's like, I'm the owner, I'm answering the phone, I'm handling customer service calls, I'm handling a sales call, I'm doing the work. It's the worst thing you can do because the potential new customer coming in to that phone, when you're on a job trying to deal with something else, you're not giving that person the amount of time that they deserve to make a good buying decision to buy from you. So of course the sales process goes poorly, right? You're going to sign some just because you as the owner have the vested interest, but the process isn't going to work well it's not going to scale from there. It's the super low hanging fruit of every business is having someone else answer the phone rather than the owner. You can afford to do that very, very early on. And especially today with AI, this stuff is, there's really no excuse for that anymore, right? So that's key because the customer service aspect of calling you, wanting to buy from you, that's your most important phone call. That's the most important thing. And if we have to like frame it that way and really think about everything.
So you're basically robbing Peter to pay Paul if you're not doing it.
100%, right? And the old argument, I'm sure there's people listening to this, the argument's like, well, yeah, but I got this problem customer that's, upset and it's a warranty and they're going to go give me a bad review and all those things. I'm not saying you shouldn't deal with them, but Mrs. Smith is calling in because she's potentially decide to buy from you. You need to have a good experience in place so that Mrs. Smith can make a good decision.
Okay. It's a good delineation. Okay. So sales process and pretty much everything, both incoming as well as cross-selling, if you will, on new service jobs, right? Those are processes. Getting essentially technicians to help feed the machine also helps. Okay. So is any of this, does it make sense when building these teams? Does the culture look any different with these teams, or do you find that it's all the same?
Explain that a little bit more.
Well, so from a culture perspective, so let's say sales culture, right? Do they all look fairly similar in terms of sales culture, or is everyone going to be unique to their own organization?
Yeah, it really depends a little bit about around the core values of the business, I believe.
Okay.
Because certain businesses I mean, let's look at roofing for a minute. So roofing is very, let's go conquer, sort of, but that's the sales mentality of roofing, right? Whereas businesses like maybe pest control or pool service are more of a, build the trust long term. Let me show how I can protect your family kind of thing. That sales culture or that sort of business culture or culture in the business has to be sort of framed around that a bit differently. I think like roofing or even outdoor sales, like pool construction or, things like that. It's more of that like conquer the, the lead, right? Thing versus the reoccurring, more products where it's a little bit more of that trust building. If I'm going in your backyard on a regular basis, you have to fully trust that I have a technician there that's completely vetted. They're not going to steal from me. I'm going to give them a key to the gate kind of thing, right? Versus a project where it's like maybe 2-3 days. I need to make sure the company knows what they're doing and installs a good product, but I'm not going to see them again. I'm just going to refer them after that. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question, Will?
100% answered my question. No, that was really good. Which might be a good segue to talk about something that we haven't talked about yet, which was what you called an accident during your roofing company's run. That spark a...
Are you talking about when I sold the business, the mistake when I sold the business?
Yes.
Yeah, so I've done great. Perfect, Will. Let's talk about it. Yeah. No, it's all good. Yeah. So when you sell a business, I learned the hard way on a couple of things, right? Over the years. And I sold the roofing business, had a nice deal put together. And ultimately I don't know, 6 months in, 9 months in, whatever, I was chairman and they said, "Hey, we got it. You go play golf, go ahead and don't worry about it." And a month or two later, they fired the sales manager. And so the sales team, a third of the sales team were very, very loyal to the sales manager, and they left with him, basically said, screw this, we're out of here. And this $47 million company that needed, $4 million in sales every month to feed the engine suddenly overnight basically went to half that. And the buyers were like, "Hey, what's going on?" They're trying to find something wrong with the business. They stopped paying me. So I sued them, they sued me. And ultimately we found a very small amount of money, $40,000 in revenue that was misappropriated in a $47 million company. And they found a rep and warranty in the contract that allowed them to sort of sue me over that. And they stopped paying me and I left $6.5 million uncollected in that business. So very, very hard lesson. And I beat myself up over it for a while. But what I learned from that was reps and warranties in all sales contracts, and this is worth every dollar price of admission, whatever this podcast is to you, can be sunsetted. They're not, back then I didn't know that. It was an ongoing clause, and every business I've sold since has sunsetted the reps and warranties so that at 12 months or 18 months or 6 months, whatever it is you can negotiate, that goes away. And so there's no other look back or claw back opportunity for the buyer because they've had the opportunity to make sure they've got everything, they want it. And then the other thing is really minimizing what the reps and warranties cover and keeping it to be things like, I paid my taxes. I didn't hire illegals, that kind of stuff, right? Like these are very core business kind of reps and warranties versus just like, we put something wrong in QuickBooks, which ultimately was what happened to me. Even though they had 9 or 6 months of due diligence, still that clause still cost me $6.5 million. So now every business I've sold since, I've had those clauses minimized. I've had the holdback minimized reps and warranties, and I've never had that issue since. And frankly, I've done more sophisticated deals since then. So, that being said, hard lesson. I beat myself up for a long time over it. And then one day I was like, yeah, okay, next. What can I do with that information? And what I can do with that information is not make that mistake again, but also help other people. I mean, obviously in my coaching business, I help other people not make the same mistakes, I guess. You learn from my 35 years. You pay for my 35 years of experience.
While I know what it is, I'm not sure if all listeners know what it is. Can you explain from an acquisition perspective or from a selling perspective, what reps and warranties, like what that really means and why it's written, etc. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So as a buyer, your reps and warranties is simply shorthand or abbreviated for representations and warranties, right? So I am representing that what the data that I'm conveying to the seller is correct and true, right? So it depends how it's written, but let's assume that it says something like this LLC is wholly owned by me, the seller. All the taxes have been paid. There's no outstanding lawsuits. There's no outstanding things that might come back, depending on whether it's an asset sale or not, depending on how the sale is structured, but there's nothing that's going to come back essentially and hurt the buyer, right? That's basically what that clause is. I'm warranting that what I've said is true, and I'm representing everything that I've represented to you, the buyer, is accurate. And typically it's outlined as to, taxation, liabilities and things like that. So it's actually called out in the paragraph, but that is basically it in a nutshell, right? Now, from a seller's perspective, you want that to be as small as possible, right? You want it to be things like taxation and legal, right? From a buyer's perspective, you want the opposite. You want that to be as broad as we can get it, right? Like, hey, look, I want to know that there's no sales out there that are under profit or whatever. Of course, nobody's going to sign that. But let's assume from a seller's perspective, you want to get this to things that you 100% know are 100% real. Does that make sense? Did that explain it?
Yep. That's a great way of explaining it. I think everyone would understand that. So, and why what happened did happen.
Yeah. The attorney will charge you $5,000 to explain that to you.
But look at that. We just saved every listener $5,000. So that's worth it.
I'm sure that, again, I'm not an attorney or a CPA, so don't take this as tax or legal advice, but do ask if you're in a transaction or thinking about a transaction, do ask about what you can do about that clause.
Good sound advice there. Good nuggets.
And frankly, to just touch on attorneys for a moment, very, very important in a business transaction, but attorneys are really good at adding time, right? They bill in tenths of an hour. So they're really good at adding time to deals. And I really encourage people to work out the business aspects of a deal without the attorney putting the legal stuff on it, right? Work out like, hey, this is what we're buying. This is why I'm interested. This is what I'm willing to pay and what I'm not willing to pay. Those aspects are business arrangements or business agreements that I think can be worked out. And then the attorneys can put the legal stuff to it, right? Because that's all very important and the document needs to be clean. But the business aspect of selling a business does not need $700 hour attorneys negotiating that.
Yeah. Every 6 minutes, the clock is running.
Every 6 minutes, baby.
Boy. Okay.
Yeah. Used to be my least favorite thing to get the attorney bill and see what they charge me to get my voicemail.
Mm-hmm. You're timing your own voicemails. You're like making sure, all right, I gotta shorten up this a little bit. This is too long.
It's Chad, call me back. Hang up.
Yep.
No, that really used to bug me. I used to tell the attorney like, hey, look, I know you legally have to disclose this, but hide that somewhere else because it really annoys me to look at that on the invoice.
It's awesome.
Why don't we talk a little bit about deal structure? Because you've done a bunch of deals, right? So was it seller finance or was it anything else?
Yeah. So there's just a little bit of a misnomer on, I don't know if it's a misnomer, but on buying and selling closely held business that, especially in the construction home services space, people think, oh, I'm just going to get a check and I'm going to walk away, right? Like my business is worth $1 million. You're just going to wire me the money and magically I'm going to go away tomorrow and it's all going to be great. That almost never happens. Like I don't even think it should. If a deal is small, so if it's like really small, fine. But in businesses that are worth any amount of money, the deals are typically structured in a way that encourages the buyer to perform and encourages the seller to perform. So let's say the deal is worth, let's just use round numbers to say it's worth $5 million. Maybe out of that $5 million, $2 million that is seller financed, right? And maybe even there's $1 million that is tied to an earnout, right? So it keeps everybody sort of involved. Now, I will say this about earnouts. Earnouts are intended to be better than the way the business is now. So if I, the buyer, am buying a business and I'm going to put an earnout in place, I want that business to perform better than it was in the past to hit that earnout. So lots of sellers get this wrong. They think, well, the earnout is just part of the compensation. And as long as the business performs as well I should be able to ding that earnout. That's not the real reason for an earnout. So structuring an earnout that's beneficial to both sides is really the key, right? It's the opposite of a divorce, right? Divorce, it should be, you both should feel pain, then you pretty much have it right? But an earnout, you should both, you should both win. The buyer should win and the seller should win, right?
So earnouts are to help instigate growth. So clawbacks would be essentially the opposite of that. Would that be a good way of looking at that?
Yeah. So different than seller finance. So seller financing, clips along. As long as the business is doing well, you're going to get paid as the seller. If the business isn't doing well, or there's some other reason comes up, the buyer may stop paying you, right? So seller financing is a risk, but most businesses get sold with some form of seller financing. It's because it allows you to sort of structure the deal in a way that's a little bit more beneficial to the seller, right? So if it's like an SBA loan that might have a piece that's a partial piece that's seller financed or whatever. Now, keep in mind, SBA, I'm not an SBA banker, so, please ask your banker for the right ways to sort of do that. But seller financing is also a way to sort of structure deals to keep it, to make it easy. So let's just use that round number again, $5 million. Somebody's business is worth $5 million, but the person buying the business doesn't have $5 million liquid, but really wants to pay that. There's options to sell the business at a lower number and, less value, or this person comes to the table with $2.5 million and finances $2.5 million through the seller. And they actually get the number, the seller actually gets the number they want or need, or the value for the business, right? And frankly, seller financing is also a way for the seller to, roll for the nice payment, make some interest, all those things, right? It sort of keep things in line. Seller financing, I think, gets a bad rap because people are just scared of it, right? There's lots of ways to put it in there, make the promissory notes so that it's well collateralized, it's all tied in, without it having to be a disaster.
Okay. Any other experiences that maybe not as well known that you'd like to share, whether it's gotchas or maybe things of note that you think people should be looking at, buy side or sell side?
Yeah. I think one of the things that maybe people, especially if you've not done this more than once, are not familiar with the idea that LOIs, like letter of intents, are pretty much just that. They're worth just the paper they're printed on. That's it. Right. So I have had multiple people. In fact, I've got a client right now that had a nice LOI, but in reality, the LOI is just to get to the negotiation point. Right. And so the purchase agreement is going to look much different than the LOI. So people get very excited when they get an LOI and they're like, hey, look, I got an LOI for $5 million. I'm going to be able to, buy my, condo in Hawaii and, whatever is going to be amazing. And they sort of start thinking that way. That's the wrong thing to do from a seller's perspective, because that's what the buyer wants you to do. He wants you to be like, okay, sweet, I'm thinking this way. And now the buyer's going to come back and negotiate you down, right? So think of an LOI as the opportunity to get you to the point where the decision is made. So it takes you off the market. It gets you sort of aligned, but almost never does an LOI and a purchase agreement completely align. And in fact, it probably shouldn't, because in reality, the buyer, if I'm buying your business, I'm giving you an LOI based on some very preliminary data you sent me. You probably sent me a handful of reports that I have no idea what the quality of earnings are. I'm basically making assumptions off of these things. I've signed a non-disclosure and you've given me that data. And I basically come back and said, I think that your business is worth this and I'd be willing to pay this if due diligence supports that. And so in due diligence, it's my job as the buyer to find ways to try and drive the price of the business down. And it's your job as a seller to provide me due diligence that doesn't allow that to happen, right? So that aspect of buying and selling businesses, LOI, that's probably my one statement, Will, is like the letter of intent is just that. It's a letter of intent. Do not go make decisions from your financial future off the letter of intent.
So don't go trying to buy that house in Hawaii or in the Cayman Islands until you've actually signed.
Yeah, don't
the
tell.
Deal for selling the business.
And it's really, really, it's really, really important too that from both the buyer and the seller aspect, because deals fall apart all the time. Deals fall apart at the closing table. It's really important to not disclose, like, people inside the company, like key employees, things like that. Like, they can get wonky quick, and, don't go talk about this stuff in the blogosphere. Don't go out in the general, public and have these discussions, because employees need to feel safe, right? They need to feel like, hey, I'm excited to come to the business every day. And the minute that I don't feel that way, guess what? I'm going to have to find a way that I can feed my family. That's just natural. That's natural human behavior. So I've seen people make this mistake. Hey, look, I signed an LOI. As far as I'm concerned, the business is sold. In 90 days, we're closing. And the reality is it's 9 months. Nothing ever happens in 60 days or 90 days, unless it's like the most basic business of any kind. Due diligence takes time. It's the most soul-sucking process you've ever been through in your life. If you thought it sucked to get a mortgage, try selling a business. Due diligence is terrible.
I also wanted to talk about EO. You are the president of EO Phoenix, Arizona, whatever. What's your title? What's the official?
Let's see. What is the grand poobah? No, yeah. So president of EO Arizona. Yeah, Arizona is a chapter for the whole state. So we only have one chapter here. So I'm current president of EO Arizona. I've been EO for 10 years. And yeah, I was chair of a regional event we just had a month ago that was pretty awesome here for the West. So all of the chapters in the West took 18 months to put that together with a co-chair of mine, Mike. And yeah, it's a journey. I've been on the board, I think 6 years. But I love EO, and EO Arizona has done a lot for me. So
awesome. What are some of the big takeaways you've had from EO, and why then become president of it? Because it seems like a lot more work.
Well, it's not less. The good news is I get a great salary, $0, right?
Ooh.
It's a solid.
You get to take that in lumps, or is that?
Yeah, however you'd like it. They'll cut it up if once a week. But yeah, it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears for volunteer work. But no, it's fantastic. I think your question is why EO, right? Like, EO has done a lot for me. Been in Forum for these 10 years, and I've been through both my parents passing away. I've been through a business sale. I've been through divorce, all things that you need that sort of tribe of people around you, right? My mother passed away from an aneurysm, probably the hardest 7 weeks of my life. She was in a coma for 7 weeks and finally died, right? So
sorry,
without my EO family around me for that, I don't know, man. You know what I mean? Like, there was people there for me in that whole thing. In the divorce, I think I came to Forum every single month and talked about that. And I know that my Forum was probably sick of hearing about it, right? But having that sort of people around you, whether you belong to EO or whatever other network there is for business owners, entrepreneurs, you need a tribe. You need a team around you, right? You need people to talk to. It doesn't matter what it is, right? And I know, you guys understand this, but that aspect of having that group that is similar to you, they own businesses, they go through the same struggles, they do all these things, it's impossible to quantify. Like, because of EO, there's a lot of things that I think I've successfully managed in my life, for sure.
Well, it's not friends, it's not family, it's Forum.
It's Forum, baby. Yeah.
And I'm a fellow EOR as well, although not as tenured as you. I will say that it has helped give me perspective in not being alone in the struggles that are very real and can't be shared with too many people, because there are very few people that can understand the struggles that happen.
Yeah.
From an ownership perspective and from a leadership perspective, what happens in home life affects the business, whether you
100%.
want it to or not, it does.
Yep. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. That whole aspect of, just having people there to talk. We talk about the 5%, right? It's the 95% we talk about with anyone, but the 5% that you're not willing to talk about with anyone, that's the stuff we really want to bring to Forum or bring to EO and talk about. And it is massively, massively valuable in that. Now, to the president thing, I think, for me, it's a way to give back. It's a chance to make my mark. I serve on some other boards as well. So I do a fair amount of, that kind of thing. But, it definitely has made me a better leader, like learning to lead leaders, right? So not only is this Forum mates or whatever, this is a board of, 15 people that are all much more qualified than I am to, do what I'm doing, and, sort of be the person to try and, lead that group, I guess is something I don't take lightly, right? That aspect of the stewardship that we have for this chapter to make sure that we're providing member value for every dollar that they spend and exponentially providing that. I take that very seriously. So highly recommend EO. We'll have to talk about it at any time. I'm sure Will is the same way.
I am. I definitely am. Probably don't talk about it enough on the podcast, but if I did, it probably would take over. So thank you for repping.
There you go. Thanks for the question.
Awesome. This has been a ton of fun, but I think it's time for our last question, Will.
I 100% agree. So this is a question that we ask on every episode. So if you were to go back 20 years, so we're talking about 2005, okay?
Yikes.
If you were to go back and give yourself advice, what would you tell yourself back in 2005?
What was happening in 2005? Yeah, that was a bit ago. Let's see. First of all, I stock in companies that make face masks.
Boy,
where did that come from? Right? But, no, I think honestly, probably my one thing would have been I think I sold the roofing business just a little bit too early. So it was like, probably stay focused. You know what I mean? Like I think what I see now with entrepreneurs is the biggest danger is the founder falls out of love with the business, right? So it's like trying to help people recognize the value that their business creates to the people around them, the employees, their lives, their families, all those things. Like, don't fall out of love too soon. I think that's probably a piece of advice. It was like, sort of find ways to be in love with the business again, stay focused. I'm not unhappy that I sold it, but I definitely think we were changing the world there. I think I just jumped off the train when I should have probably stayed on it at the moment.
Very neat. Neat perspective.
I agree. No, totally.
And probably join EO sooner.
Yeah, and join EO then.
Exactly.
This has been a ton of fun. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that, Chad?
Yeah, sure. Obviously you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and all the social media stuff, but our website, nextlevelgrowth.com/Chad Nikkel is another way to kind of see my bio and check that out. Chad at nextlevelgrowth.com is my email address. I'm more than happy to have a conversation, see where I can help out, go for a coffee, whatever it is. And I just love talking business, and for sure in the construction and home services space, that's my people. So I love it.
Yeah. Also, shout out to you for your awesome coin card that I got. This thing's legit, and I've had that for, I don't know, months at this point.
I love it.
Yeah, no. I don't know if you give that to everybody or if I'm just special. Hopefully you don't tell me. I'll just believe I'm special.
It's just you, Justin. That's it.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell the people before we say goodbye?
No, it was great. I love just chatting business. Thanks so much, guys, for having me. I'm very excited to have had the opportunity to be on your podcast. You guys are awesome.
Cool. This has been a ton of fun, listeners. And until next time, adios.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
keep building scale.